In the year of 1347, the Black Death crept silently across Europe like a veil of rot. There stood a village near the edge of the Bavarian woods that never appeared on maps. Locals called it Greffenwald, a name whispered more than spoken, like something caught between memory and myth. It was a place where fog hung low, and the sun dared not linger too long. Travelers avoided it. Horses balked at its border, and the ravens never left. Greffenwald was home to barely 200 souls, most of them mute with the weight of something ancient pressing upon them. They farmed what little grew in the shadow of the pines, tended to their dead quickly, and spoke in riddles to their children. But what truly made this place infamous, what soaked its earth in the kind of fear that didn't speak but lingered, was the decree of 1311. An edict passed in secret by a local magistrate and upheld for decades. The decree allowed, under the pretense of religious exception, the ritualistic breeding between women of the village and a creature known only as Der Schwarzgast, the Black Guest. They never used the word demon. It was considered unsophisticated. Instead, the law referred to him as a non-human entity sanctioned by the Church of Deeper Grace, a splinter sect excommunicated centuries ago, but still lingering like mildew in backwaters like Greffenwald. The reasoning, a prophecy, perhaps an old curse. No one knew which came first anymore. It was said that once every 13 years the Black Guest would come through the veil between worlds, under a moon veiled in smoke, and a woman chosen not by birth or status but by silence would be taken to the church crypt. She would not return until dawn. 9 months later, the village would welcome a child whose eyes would not blink and whose shadow always lagged behind its feet. Her name was Anika Feldstein, and she was 19 when she was chosen. She had hair the color of dried wheat and skin that bruised like fruit left in the sun too long. Her father, once the village scribe, had gone mad. Scribbling symbols, he claimed, were shown to him in dreams. Her mother drowned in a basin without water. They said Anika never cried as a child, just stared wide-eyed, as though always listening to a conversation no one else could hear. The night they came for her, she did not scream. 4 robed figures, faceless in the dark, carried her through the snow without footprints. Not a single door opened, no candle flickered. Only the crows stirred. Inside the crypt, beneath the abandoned chapel where salt would not settle and prayers curled into smoke, she waited. What happened in that vault Anika would never speak of. She returned with torn fingernails and eyes that no longer moved in unison. She walked slower, ate little, sang to herself in forgotten dialects, but she carried her pregnancy in silence. The village whispered, some wept. One man hung himself on a birch tree and was found smiling. 9 months later, under a blood-colored dawn, Anika gave birth. The child was almost human, except for the skin translucent, veined like marble, and the mouth had smiled before it cried. The villagers named him Benedikt, after the monk who first wrote the decree. Anika never touched him. She spoke only once to the midwife, just before sleep took her for 3 days. He dreams in Latin, she whispered, and I can hear every word. But the story of Anika was not yet over. Nor was Benedikt's fate sealed. This was merely the first brushstroke on a canvas already blackened at its corners. For in the laws of Greffenwald there was no such thing as orphans. Every child had a purpose. Benedikt's was written long before his mother ever drew her first breath. Benedikt grew quickly, as if the hours fed him more than milk. By his 2nd year, he could recite psalms backward. By his 3rd, he had already memorized the names of all the bones buried beneath the churchyard. He did not play, he calculated. He did not cry, he corrected. The villagers avoided his gaze, not out of hatred, but awe, wrapped in a coat of dread. When he passed, they bowed their heads, as one might before a storm or a hanging. Anika watched from afar, always from windows never opened. She had grown pale, as though her blood had been drawn out night by night. Her hands, once nimble from embroidery, now trembled constantly. She did not speak in the tavern. She did not light candles on All Souls' Night. She wore a red thread around her wrist, an old charm said to ward off dreams that spoke in tongues. And yet she loved the boy in her own cursed way. She left bread near his doorstep, stitched talismans into his sleeves, sat outside his cottage when he slept, and whispered lullabies to the night, not to soothe him, but to warn the darkness around him not to get too close. By the time Benedikt was 7, strange things began to happen in Greffenwald. Livestock were born inside out. The bell tower rang on nights with no wind. A girl named Lise began drawing symbols in ash, though she had never learned to write. The local priest, Father Gerhard, who had once blessed Benedikt with trembling hands, was found crucified upside down within his own confessional, his eyes sewn shut with horsehair. The church declared it the work of devil winds, a superstition dating back to plague years. But the villagers knew better. They whispered of Benedikt walking through the fields under moonless skies, his feet not sinking into the frost. They called him kind Derschwell, child of the threshold. Yet the decree protected him. That old law, etched into iron and buried beneath the altar, declared his presence divine necessity. He shall be marked but untouched, feared but unharmed, it read. For his blood seals the pact, and the pact shields the land. No one understood what the pact was, none dared question it, until one night Anika disappeared. No one saw her leave. No notes, no signs of struggle. Her room was cold, untouched, as if she had evaporated between heartbeats. Benedikt, when asked, simply said, "She went where the song comes from." Search parties entered the forest. None returned. Greffenwald grew quieter after that. The birds stopped nesting. The river began to flow backward for a day, and then froze solid for weeks. Benedikt stopped speaking in German and began uttering things no one could translate, but everyone understood. Emotions would shift in the air as he passed. Shame, terror, lust, regret, like someone tuning human souls with invisible fingers. The midwife who delivered him gouged her own eyes out. The innkeeper's youngest son woke screaming every night, begging to sew the sky shut. A hunter shot Benedikt from afar. The bullet never reached him. The hunter's own hounds turned on him by morning. The town elders convened for the first time in a decade beneath the old linden tree. They brought with them the iron-bound book containing the decree, its pages brittle, ink faded like blood long dried. They debated for days without sleep. The oldest among them, Klaus Richter, claimed he remembered another boy years before Benedikt born the same way. His mother burned herself alive. The child vanished. The village suffered a drought for 9 years. The pattern was repeating. Still, the law stood until Benedikt turned 12. That was the age, according to the decree, when the child would either be claimed by the other world or become its gatekeeper. And this time, he chose not to go. On the first morning of Benedikt's 12th year, the sun rose black. Not metaphorically black, as though a sheet of coal had slipped between earth and sky. The birds did not sing. The dogs did not bark. Only the church bell rang, not by hand, but as if moved by breath. Greffenwald awoke to stillness, so complete it felt like the pause between two blinks, stretched unbearably long. Benedikt stood at the edge of the town square, barefoot on frozen stone. His eyes, now entirely white, stared at nothing, yet saw everything. Round him the air shimmered faintly, like heat over candle wax. Grass withered beneath his feet. The earth cracked as though something beneath it shifted its weight. The elders arrived in silence, holding the decree and shaking hands. The passage was clear. Upon the 12th year, the threshold shall close. The child must pass or perish. Should he remain, the pact unravels. It had never been tested. No child before had stayed. But Benedikt, when told of this, simply smiled. "They never asked what I wanted," he said, "but I have listened, and I have chosen." He did not flee. He did not vanish. Instead, he walked into the chapel and sat upon the altar like a boy awaiting supper. The crucifix above him split in two. The stained glass melted like sugar. And the ravens, those ever-watching sentinels, descended not to caw, but to perch. Silently, obediently. Then the changes began. It started with language. Words no longer sounded as they should. A mother would ask for water, and her child would bring her thorns. The baker wrote numbers into loaves of bread, and no one dared eat them. The blacksmith forged iron that wept in moonlight. Old diaries rewrote themselves. Sermons spoken on Sunday came out in languages from no known continent. Next came the dreams. Every villager dreamed the same dream, a spiral staircase of bone leading downward forever. Benedikt stood at the top, reaching out, whispering a single word none could recall, upon waking. But all remembered the feeling that to descend meant never returning. Some tried to resist sleep. They bled from the ears within days. Then came the mirror children. They looked like the town's youth, same freckles, same voices, but always just slightly wrong. A tooth too many. Fingers that bent the other way. They never blinked, never laughed. One mother swore her son came back with different memories, and when she confronted him, he smiled and whispered, the other one was softer. Greffenwald was unraveling, thread by thread. Benedikt no longer lived in the chapel. He had built something beneath it, a staircase no one could see, but everyone felt pulsing beneath their feet like a second heartbeat. He wandered the village only at dusk, whispering into the ears of sleeping cattle, rubbing ash onto doorframes, humming melodies that made the crops lean toward him. The villagers turned once more to the decree. They begged for a solution, a loophole, a command. But the words had changed. The ink itself twisted overnight. The once clear lines were now riddles, new passages written in a language resembling scripture, but composed of teeth-like glyphs. The book had rewritten itself under Benedikt's will. The elders argued, some pleading to offer him a bride like the old stories, a woman to tame the inhuman. Others insisted they burn the crypt, salt the soil, erase everything. But none moved, because by now, every soul in Greffenwald carried a piece of him. The midwife who had clawed her eyes out had returned, smiling blindly and repeating his name in lullaby. The priest's corpse had not decayed, but sat upright in the chapel, nodding when Benedikt passed. Even the animals bowed their heads as he walked by, as if greeting something older than hunger. And still, the townspeople did nothing. Not from cowardice, from belief. Deep, unspoken belief that perhaps Benedikt was not the curse, but the judgment. That they, their fathers, and their fathers' fathers had made the pact. That generations ago they had bartered something sacred in exchange for peace, harvest, and protection, and now the bill had come due. Benedikt had chosen to stay. Now Greffenwald had to choose what to become. On the 13th winter since his birth, Benedikt stood at the center of Greffenwald, barefoot as always, his white eyes now threaded with thin red veins like cracks in porcelain. Snow fell around him, but melted before touching his skin. The village gathered not by summons, but by instinct, as though every soul had heard a bell that never rang. None spoke, none dared breathe too deeply. The church stood behind him, now a hollow husk, its doors rotted. Pews twisted into impossible shapes, the altar pulsing faintly like a living thing. A decision had to be made. And the villagers at last chose to remember. They dug into forgotten drawers, opened sealed chests, unwrapped relics passed down in secret. Fragments of the truth spilled out like moths. Letters written in panic, confessions smudged with blood, crude sketches of beings with too many joints and too little mercy. They read of the first pact, not a deal made in fear but in ambition. Centuries ago, during a plague, Greffenwald had asked for protection, not from illness but from irrelevance. Other towns faded, burned, collapsed. Greffenwald endured. Its soil remained fertile, its waters clean. But the cost had been a child. Every generation, a vessel, they called it, a bridge. Benedikt was the latest, but he was also different. He did not wish to be a bridge. He wanted to be the door. The town's final gathering took place beneath the linden tree, its bark now carved with hundreds of tiny handprints. No one knew who had made them. Klaus Richter, the oldest among them, stood with the decree in one hand and a rusted ceremonial dagger in the other. We fed the dark, he rasped, then prayed it would never learn to hunger. A choice: bind Benedikt once more, offer him a new mother, a new form, another 13 years of delay, or destroy him and risk the unknown. But how do you kill what was never fully born? Girl stepped forward. Barefoot, thin as reeds, perhaps 11 years old, her name was Mina. No one knew her parents. Some said she had simply peered after the last frost. She looked at Benedikt and smiled, not in fear, but recognition. I know the way, she said. He is not the door. I am. Not from sorrow, but relief, because he too had been trapped.
Not just in flesh, but in expectation.
Gosh. A boy shaped by law, not will. He stepped aside. The chapel groaned. The earth split. And beneath their feet, something ancient exhaled. No one entered the chapel. No one followed. What happened inside would never be recorded. The next morning, the snow returned. Real snow. Soft, clinging. The ravens were gone. Mere children dissolved like dew. The church crumbled into nothing but roots and bone. Benedikt was gone. In his place, a stone, smooth, round, warm to the touch. The decree was found beside it, now blank. Greffenwald changed. Slowly, subtly. Crops still grew, but with effort. The river no longer sang. People aged. Children cried. There were no more perfect harvests, no more quiet deaths, but there was peace. Earned peace. And every spring, a red thread was tied around the old linden tree, as if to remember not just the curse, but the choice. Because Greffenwald had once bargained away its soul for safety. But in the end, it was a child born of pact and pain who taught them how to reclaim it.